There is a light bulb in a California fire station that has been burning since 1901. Most people assume it's a lucky accident of manufacture. It isn't. The right explanation is that the companies making light bulbs held a secret meeting in 1924 and agreed to make their products worse on purpose. Every product you own that breaks on schedule breaks for the same reason. The meeting nobody was supposed to know about. On December 23, 1924, while the rest of Geneva prepared for Christmas, representatives from the world's largest light bulb manufacturers gathered in a hotel meeting room. Present: Osram from Germany, Philips from the Netherlands, Compagnie des Lampes from France, General Electric from the United States, several others. They had a problem. The light bulb had become too good. By 1924, a standard household bulb lasted between 1,500 and 2,500 hours. Some lasted longer. The technology had outrun the business model. If bulbs lasted too long, customers wouldn't need new ones. The solution they agreed on: engineer their bulbs to fail at exactly 1,000 hours, not as a side effect of making them cheaper, not as a byproduct of making them brighter. Deliberately, they assigned engineers to solve a problem that had never existed before. How do you make a light bulb reliably worse? The answer involved increasing current, manipulating voltage, and modifying the tungsten filament to degrade at a predictable point. Each member company sent bulb samples to a central testing laboratory in Switzerland. Any company whose bulb lasted longer than 1,000 hours was fined 0.5 Swiss francs for every 100 hours over the limit. Fined for making a product that was too good. The cartel called itself the Phoebus Cartel, after the Greek god of light. By 1933, average bulb lifespan had dropped from roughly 1,800 hours to just over 1,200. The cartel held through the 1930s before World War II made cross-border coordination impossible. But it left something behind: a name for the practice, planned obsolescence, and the proof that making products last had always been a choice. The bulb that wasn't supposed to exist. Fire Station Number 6, Livermore, California. The Centennial Light has been on since 1901, manufactured by the Shelby Electric Company in Ohio in the late 1890s. Before the Phoebus Cartel, before anyone had agreed that bulbs needed expiry dates, a local businessman donated it to the fire department in 1901. For over 124 years, it has illuminated the engine bay. It has been switched off only a handful of times, briefly during a 1937 renovation, and for 22 minutes in 1976 when it was moved between fire stations in a specially designed box, with a full fire truck escort and an electrician standing by to reinstall it. The Guinness Book of World Records confirmed it as the longest-burning light bulb ever documented. General Electric confirmed it. Ripley's Believe It or Not confirmed it. The bulb was made by hand with a carbon filament thicker than modern tungsten designs. It now burns at about 4 watts, dimmer than its original 60, but still on. It is not a miracle, it is evidence. The technology to build things that last indefinitely existed before the industry decided not to use it. This is the only section in this video where the product didn't fail. Every section after this is about a decision. General Motors invents a different kind of obsolescence. The Phoebus Cartel made things break faster. Alfred Sloan at General Motors realized you didn't need to do that. You just needed to make last year's model feel embarrassing to own. In the 1920s, Sloan introduced the annual model change, not because previous cars had stopped working, but because status anxiety was more reliable than mechanical failure. New colors, slightly restyled panels, marginally different trim on mechanically identical vehicles. He called it keeping the consumer dissatisfied. No engineering required. This is the architecture of every major consumer product release cycle since. The iPhone you own on September 1st still works identically on September 15th, the day the new one launches. But the new one exists. It has a name. It has a number higher than yours. That is not an accident of product development. It is a strategy documented by Alfred Sloan 100 years ago, applied globally with considerably more sophistication. Apple quietly slows down your phone, then pays $613 million for it. In January 2017, Apple released iOS 10.2.1, described publicly as a routine security update. Inside it was code that throttled processor performance on iPhones with degraded batteries, without disclosure, without notification, without any entry in the update notes. A Reddit user called TechFire noticed something unusual in late 2017. His iPhone 6s ran measurably faster after a battery replacement. He ran benchmarks before and after. The difference was significant and exactly reproducible. Other users confirmed the same pattern across multiple iPhone models. Apple confirmed the throttling on December 20th, 2017. Their stated reason: aged batteries couldn't deliver peak current to the processor without causing unexpected shutdowns. Smoothing the power draw prevented those shutdowns. The technical reasoning was defensible. The surrounding behavior was not. Millions of iPhone users had watched their phones slow down over months and concluded reasonably that their phone was getting old and needed replacing. Apple had sold them new ones. The throttling was real. The non-disclosure was deliberate. The commercial outcome, accelerated replacement among users whose phones had been made to feel slow, was entirely predictable. Apple dropped out-of-warranty battery replacement from $79 to $29 through all of 2018. They settled a U.S. class action for $500 million in February 2020. They paid an additional $113 million to 34 U.S. states in November 2020. France fined them 25 million euros. Italy, 10 million euros. Total, over $613 million. Apple described the throttling as a feature to protect battery health. The courts described it as worth settling. The software update that retires hardware without breaking it. There is a version of planned obsolescence that requires no engineering at all, no adhesive, no expiry chips, no throttling code. Just stop writing software for the device. When Microsoft ended support for Windows 10 in October 2025, it forced a choice on hundreds of millions of users: upgrade to hardware that meets Windows 11's TPM 2.0 requirement, or use an operating system that will no longer receive security patches. Those machines didn't break. The software around them stopped cooperating. WhatsApp dropped support for iOS 15 in 2024. The iPhone 7, released in 2016, still physically functional, cannot run iOS 16 and can no longer run one of the world's most used messaging applications. Not because it broke, because a version number moved past it. This is the most scalable form of obsolescence ever invented. No manufacturing change, no recall, no engineering cost. A device that costs $600 to replace is retired by a decision that costs the company nothing to implement. The $400,000 tractor you can't fix yourself. This is the section that surprises people because it has nothing to do with smartphones. John Deere manufactures agricultural equipment, tractors, combines, planters that can cost $400,000 or more. Modern John Deere machines run on software, and for over a decade, John Deere argued in court that while a farmer may own the tractor, they do not own the software that makes it run. The practical consequence: farmers with broken equipment couldn't diagnose or fix it themselves. The diagnostic tools were locked behind dealer-only access. If a sensor failed during harvest, a farmer couldn't plug in a tool, read the fault code, and replace the part. They had to call an authorized John Deere technician, wait for availability, and pay dealer rates, sometimes waiting days in the middle of a harvest window that lasts weeks. One Illinois farmer told investigators that when a John Deere technician finally arrived, it took 30 minutes to diagnose a faulty sensor, unscrew it, and install a replacement. "If I knew what sensor was bad," the farmer said, "I could have fixed it in 5 minutes. But if you don't have the software, it's impossible to know what's wrong." The Library of Congress ruled in 2015 that repairing agricultural equipment doesn't infringe copyright. John Deere continued restricting diagnostic access anyway because the ruling didn't require them to provide the tools. In January 2023, under mounting political and legal pressure, John Deere signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the American Farm Bureau Federation. They agreed to provide diagnostic tool access to farmers and independent repair shops. The diagnostic subscription John Deere now charges for that access, $3,100 per year. And as part of signing the agreement, the American Farm Bureau Federation agreed to stop supporting right-to-repair legislation at the state and federal level. John Deere didn't open its repair system. It turned the organization, representing American farmers, into a lobbying argument against the laws that would have required it to. The glue that replaced screws. Mobile phones used to be held together with screws. Standard screwdriver. Remove the back. Replace the battery. Return the device to full function. Today, Apple, Samsung, and most major phone manufacturers bond the glass, battery, and internal components with industrial adhesive. The official reasons, waterproofing and structural integrity, are real. A sealed device is genuinely more water-resistant than a screwed one, but waterproofing and repairability are not mutually exclusive. Nokia and Sony have both produced waterproof devices with replaceable batteries. What adhesive bonding changed is not the waterproofing, it's the repair economics. What used to be a $40 battery swap at any local repair shop is now a $90 to $150 service requiring heat equipment to separate bonded glass, specialized calibration tools, and proximity to an authorized service center. In many cities, that service center is Apple or Samsung themselves. iFixit's repairability score for the iPhone 6, last iPhone with a standard screwed back panel, was 7 out of 10. Every iPhone between 2016 and 2021 scored between 4 and 6. The iPhone 14 scored 7 again. After years of public criticism, iFixit campaigning, and legislative pressure that made the cost of non-repairability too visible to maintain, Apple presented the improved repairability of the iPhone 14 as a design achievement. It was a response to pressure. Parts pairing, when your own replacement part doesn't work. Apple introduced a system called serialization, sometimes called parts pairing, across its iPhone lineup. When a component is installed in an Apple device, its serial number is checked against a database. If the part was not installed by an Apple-authorized technician using Apple's proprietary process, the device responds. Install a genuine Apple battery sourced outside Apple's supply chain. Permanent, unable to verify warning in settings. Install a genuine Apple screen from another real iPhone. Face ID disabled. The screen is real. The battery is real. The restriction is entirely software. The message to users is precise. Your device may not perform correctly unless you paid us to fix it. In 2022, Oregon passed legislation specifically banning parts pairing for devices sold after July 2021. The law required manufacturers to provide parts, tools, and software for independent repair, and prohibited the use of software to restrict those parts. Apple announced changes to its parts pairing policy the same year. They described the change as improving the customer experience. It was a legal response to a law. The companies that will not change until legislation forces them to are telling you something about why they didn't change before the legislation. Your printer knows when to stop, regardless of how much ink remains. Ink cartridges from Epson, HP, Canon, and Brother contain chips that track usage. These chips trigger a stop signal after a set number of print cycles, regardless of how much physical ink remains in the cartridge. Consumer investigations found cartridges declared empty by the printer's software with 20 to 40% of their ink volume still physically present. The printer stopped. The ink was still there. HP went further. In 2016, HP pushed a firmware update to millions of internet-connected printers. The update remotely disabled third-party ink cartridges overnight. Products that had worked the previous day stopped functioning after an update downloaded automatically while the user was asleep. HP's justification: third-party cartridges could damage the printer or compromise print quality. The practical outcome: third-party cartridges cost roughly 60 to 70% less than HP's own. After significant public backlash and legal pressure, HP partially reversed the firmware change. The same practice, under different technical descriptions, has continued across the industry in various forms since. A product you own, updated overnight, in your home, to stop working with products you had legally purchased. The line between a firmware update and deliberate product sabotage is narrower than most people stop to consider. The mountain nobody planned for. The world generated 62 million tons of electronic waste in 2022, an 82% increase from 2010. The metals in those 62 million tons, gold, copper, cobalt, palladium, were worth $91 billion. The amount formally recovered, $28 billion. Less than 23% of global e-waste was formally recycled. Americans discard approximately 416,000 mobile phones every day. Not because those phones stopped working, because the software stopped being supported, the battery degraded past usefulness, or the new model made the old one feel insufficient. The e-waste crisis is not a side effect of consumer technology. It is the direct physical output of business models built around replacement cycles. Every product engineered to become obsolete faster becomes waste faster. The Phoebus Cartel engineered bulbs to fail in 1,000 hours in 1924. The 2022 equivalent is 62 million tons of discarded electronics. rising by 2.6 million tons every year, projected to hit 82 million tons by 2030. How governments are fighting back, and what that tells you. In June 2025, binding eco-design regulations for smartphones took effect across the European Union. The rules are specific and legally enforceable, not voluntary targets. Batteries must withstand 800 charging cycles, while retaining 80% of original capacity. Manufacturers must make at least 15 categories of spare parts available for 7 years after a model is discontinued. Software updates must be provided for a minimum of 5 years after the last unit is sold. Professional repairers must be given fair access to the software and firmware needed for repairs. Smartphones must now display a mandatory repairability score, a through E, on their packaging. The broader EU Right to Repair Directive implements across all member states by July 2026. In the United States, Oregon, California, New York, Minnesota, and Colorado have passed enforceable right-to-repair laws. Over a quarter of Americans now live in a state where manufacturers are legally required to support independent repair. Here is the thing worth sitting with at the end of all of this. Every single change these laws are forcing, longer battery life, available spare parts, software support, accessible repair tools, was technically possible before the laws required it. The manufacturers knew how to do all of it. They chose not to. The moment the law changed, they complied. That is not a coincidence. That is a confirmation. On December 23, 1924, a group of businessmen sat in a Geneva hotel and agreed to make light bulbs worse. They fined each other for making products that lasted too long. The bulb in the Livermore fire station has been burning since 1901 and is still on today. It is not there to prove that modern light bulbs are inferior. It is there to prove that the decision to make them inferior was exactly that, a decision. The throttled iPhone, the sealed battery, the locked tractor, the printer that stops when the ink is still there. These are not the inevitable outcomes of technology. They are business decisions recorded in internal documents, settled in courts, and fined by governments. The question was never whether companies could build things that last. It was whether the business model would allow it. The answer is starting to change, not because the ethics changed, because the law did. Apple appears in this story more than once. Every major Apple mistake, ranked and explained in full, it is on screen right now.